Rain has a way of making silence louder. It does not matter if cars rush past on the highway or if the air is filled with the hum of power lines. When the rain comes down in heavy needles, it drowns out every human sound until you hear only yourself. That was what I remember most about that night. Not the sound of the engine, not even the moment the door closed behind me. What I remember is the silence pressed into me by the rain and how it carried a truth I was not ready to face. I was 13 years old, squeezed into the back seat of a car that felt more like a cell than a place of safety. The windows were fogged and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and cheap air freshener. My father sat rigid in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel as if letting go would mean losing something precious. My mother was beside him, but she might as well have been a statue. Her face was turned toward the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She did not speak, not a single word. Harper, my little sister, was beside me chewing on the end of a juice box straw, her legs swinging against the seat. She was too young to understand the way the air in the car had shifted. Too young to hear what I could hear in the quiet. When the headlights of the gas station appeared through the blur of rain, I thought we had stopped for snacks or maybe for fuel. The place was almost deserted, just one flickering light above the pump and a thin veil of mist rising from the gravel lot. My father pulled in slowly, the tires crunching on wet stone, then shifted the car into park. His voice came without warning, stripped of any warmth. "Step outside for a moment, Dakota." There was no anger in it. Anger I could have understood. It was flat, the kind of tone you use when you are giving instructions to a stranger. I froze for a second, waiting for more, waiting for explanation. None came. The silence stretched until I felt it pressing into my skin. My hand found the door handle and I stepped out. The rain greeted me instantly, sharp and cold against my face. My jacket did nothing to protect me. The gravel shifted beneath my sneakers as I turned back to look inside. My mother did not look at me. Her hands tightened where they rested on her arms, as if she were afraid to unfold them. Harper opened her mouth, a small sound forming in her throat, but my father cut her off with a glance so sharp she sank back into her seat. His eyes met mine for the briefest second, then the car began to roll backward. Slowly at first, then faster, taillights glowing red through the curtain of rain. I thought it was a test. Parents had strange ways of teaching lessons, or so I believed then. I waited, my hair plastered against my forehead, the water soaking through to my skin. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The gravel lot grew emptier with every second. No car returned. I looked down at my hand and realized there was something in it. A $20 bill, crumpled, already softening in the rain, and a folded piece of paper. I did not open the note. My fingers were too stiff from the cold, and a part of me wanted to believe it would say something that proved this was temporary, that they would come back. The gas station looked like the only living thing for miles. I walked toward it, shoes slipping on the wet stones. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed, harsh and unforgiving. The clerk behind the counter was young, maybe 25, scratching at a lottery ticket with a coin. He looked up once, then back down, unimpressed by the sight of a dripping child standing at the threshold. I wandered the candy aisle pretending to choose something, the $20 bill clenched in my hand. Every time a pair of headlights swept across the window, I darted to look, hope flaring only to die again when the car passed without slowing. I told myself they would return. Of course they would. No one leaves their daughter behind on purpose. Minutes stretched into an hour. The clerk finally asked if someone was coming for me. I nodded too quickly, the lie tumbling out before I could stop it. My parents. They had to turn around. He frowned but said nothing. A few minutes later, he placed a towel on the counter and offered me a steaming cup of instant cocoa. I wanted to thank him, but my throat felt locked shut. I sat on the plastic bench near the door, clutching the cup between my hands, watching steam rise into the stale air. Another hour passed. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping on the glass like fingers demanding to be let in. My jacket clung to me, cold and useless. The folded note remained in my pocket, pressing against my leg like a secret that would break me if I opened it. I wanted to believe in second chances. I wanted to believe headlights would appear any moment, familiar faces inside ready to take me home. They never came. It was close to midnight when the police cruiser pulled into the lot, lights dimmed, engine humming low. A woman in uniform stepped out, her tan windbreaker fluttering in the wind. She knelt in front of me, clipboard in hand, her voice soft but steady. "Hey there, sweetheart. Can you tell me your name?" My lips parted, but nothing came. My throat felt like it was filled with glass. After a long pause, the words scraped out, fragile and uncertain. "Dakota, Dakota Farmer." She wrote it down slowly, her eyes scanning my face as if she was afraid I might vanish if she looked away. I followed her to the cruiser without resistance. The clerk raised a hand in a sad little wave as I passed. I did not wave back. I could not. Inside the car, the air was warmer, the vinyl seats smelling faintly of coffee and dust. The officer started the engine, the radio filling the silence with a country song that I would never remember. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it was no use. The kind of cold I felt that night came from the inside. It was the cold of knowing you had been chosen for absence. Only then did I open the note. 4 words stared back at me, each one sharp as a blade. Some kids aren't meant to stay. The paper trembled in my hand. I wanted to tear it, to throw it away, but I held on, my fingers locked. That night was the beginning of my erasure. I did not cry, not in front of the officer, not even alone in the back seat. The tears came years later, in deserts and safe houses, in moments when silence felt too heavy. That night, I only stared out the rain-streaked window and felt myself slip out of the world I thought I belonged to. The police station smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. The kind of smell that clings to places where people wait more than they live. They led me through double doors into a small room where the light hummed too loudly and the clock on the wall ticked slower than it should. The officer with the tan windbreaker guided me to a chair and placed a blanket over my shoulders. I sat there shivering even though the air was warmer than outside. Questions came, one after another, voices that tried to be kind but could not hide the suspicion beneath them. What is your full name? Do you know your birthday? Where were you before the gas station? I answered in fragments, my voice breaking like glass under weight. I told them my parents would come back for me. Even as I said it, I felt the words fall hollow to the floor. No one believed me. I did not believe myself. They let me sleep for a few hours in a cot tucked behind the holding room. The blanket was thin and the pillow smelled like bleach, but I was too tired to notice. I remember staring at the ceiling until my eyes blurred, tracing the water stains in the tiles like they were constellations in a sky that belonged to someone else. I fell asleep clutching the note, folded and unfolded so many times that the edges had begun to fray. When morning came, social services arrived with their polite voices and polished shoes. They spoke about temporary guardianship, about paperwork, about programs designed to protect children like me. They never once asked how it felt to wake up without a family. They did not see the silence that stretched inside me like a canyon. I nodded when they spoke. I signed where they told me to sign. I learned early that nodding was easier than explaining. The days that followed blurred together. Group homes with peeling paint, foster houses where I was a visitor rather than a child. Every place smelled different, but the air always carried the same weight of not belonging. People came and went. Some were kind in small ways, others cold in ways that did not need words. I learned to keep quiet, to fold myself into corners, to take up as little space as possible. It was Harper I thought of most in those days. Her face pressed against the car window as it rolled away, the way her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again when Father's eyes cut across the back seat. Did she understand what happened? Did she think of me at night when the house grew quiet? Or did she learn, the way children do, to forget quickly what hurts too much? I hated myself for wondering. I hated myself for hoping she remembered. School was another battlefield. Children have sharp instincts, they can smell difference, they can taste absence. They saw me as the girl without parents, the one who lived on the edge of town in places no one wanted to talk about. I did my work, I kept my head down. I became invisible because being invisible meant surviving. But invisibility was never enough. Not for me. By the time I was 16, I had discovered the one place where my silence could turn into strength. Books. Not stories about fairy tales or ordinary lives, but books filled with maps, battles, and the kind of strategies that explained how people shaped wars and wars shaped people. I found them in libraries, in dusty corners where no one else looked. I traced the lines of generals I had never heard of, learning how they moved troops, how they tricked enemies, how they built victories out of nothing but patience and precision. It was there, between those pages, that I felt something return to me. Not family, not comfort, but purpose. If I could not belong to anyone, maybe I could belong to something larger. Maybe I could prove that erasure was not the same as disappearance. When I turned 18, I walked into a recruitment office. The man behind the desk looked at my file, frowning at the gaps, the missing documents, the notes that marked me as unstable. He asked if I was sure. I told him yes. I said it with a steadiness that surprised even me. That night, back in the small room where I was staying, I unfolded the note again. The paper was nearly torn, the ink smudged but still legible. Some kids aren't meant to stay. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I placed it carefully inside a journal where I kept every plan, every piece of knowledge I had gathered. I was not meant to stay. Fine, I would learn to move forward, and I would never let them forget the child they had tried to erase. The memory of the gas station followed me into every new chapter of my life. It was not just a night. It was a scar carved deep into my identity. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the cold rain slicing through my jacket, could still hear the sound of tires rolling away, could still see the look on my father's face in that brief moment before he left me. It was not anger. It was not sorrow. It was finality. And so I carried it with me, like a secret I never spoke but always felt. It was the foundation of every silence, every strategy, every choice. It was the night Dakota farmer stopped being a daughter and became a shadow. What none of them knew, what even I could not yet understand, was that shadows have a way of stretching. They can be ignored, but they cannot be erased forever. That night did not end at the gas station. It began there. People like to say the past fades, that memory softens with time. That was never true for me. My past was written into systems, into records, into files that carried the weight of authority. It was not something that faded. It was something that had been cut out with precision, like a surgeon removing a vital organ and leaving the scar to remind you it was gone. I learned how to live with silence, how to fold myself into corners that no one watched. In the military, that was almost a gift. The training grounds demanded endurance more than conversation, obedience more than explanation. I was good at disappearing in plain sight. I ran until my lungs burned, I fought until my muscles trembled, I memorized every manual until I could recite doctrine in my sleep. I thought if I worked hard enough, I would build a place no one could erase. It was a lie I told myself, and for a while it worked. During my second year, I was called to a secure booth. The walls were metal and unkind, the kind of walls built to swallow secrets and never echo them back. A retinal scanner blinked in front of me, waiting. When the light turned green, the screen unfolded lines of text across its surface. My name appeared first, sharp in black letters, Farmer Dakota, then it vanished. The screen refreshed and showed something else: status, inactive, reason, psychiatric instability, candidate deemed unfit for extended service. Date, May 2004. The signature beneath it was one I knew too well: David R. Farmer. I stared at the lines until they blurred. My hands clenched so tight the veins in my arms ached. It was not enough for him to leave me at that gas station. He had followed me here, into the one place I thought I could rebuild. He had signed away my existence with a stroke of his pen. He had not destroyed me. He had deleted me. For a long time, I did nothing. My training screamed to obey the record, to accept the verdict written in digital stone. But the silence inside me refused. I remembered the rain, the tail lights, the note in my pocket. I remembered the officer writing down my name as if she were afraid I would disappear. They had tried to make me vanish, but I was still here. I leaned back in the chair and breathed slowly, letting the implications sink into the corners of the room. I was not supposed to see this file. Someone had left the lock half open, or maybe the system had grown careless. I whispered into the console, my voice low and steady. Override protocol, internal audit. Subject, Farmer Dakota. Clearance, strategic tier level 9. The machine hesitated, a pulse of amber light washing across the scanner. Then it accepted my command. The file unfolded deeper, revealing fragments of my history reduced to skeletal notes. West Point enrollment, 1 year. Status change, discharged. Reason, instability. No mention of my scores, no mention of the strategies I had submitted, no mention of the missions I had assisted in. Just absence. A hollow where my life should have been. I traced the digital signature again and again, the way the pen curved at the end of his name, the pressure of the stroke. My father's hand was unmistakable. He had done this. He had not only abandoned me, he had erased me from the system meant to protect me. I closed the file and leaned back. The room was cold, but my chest burned. For years, I had believed survival was enough. That living quietly was a kind of victory. But in that moment, I understood silence was not victory. Silence was their weapon. When I left the booth, the hallway stretched long and empty, lights flickering in clinical rhythm. My boots echoed against the floor, each step carrying the weight of a choice. I could walk away, let the file stand, keep my life hidden in the cracks, or I could follow the trail, even if it led back to the people who had sworn I was not meant to stay. I did not hesitate. I began with names, the ones who had worked in administration before the system was fully automated. There was always someone who remembered, someone who had seen the erasures before they were digitized into silence. One name surfaced again and again: Fulton Charles, a retired clerk, famous for never forgetting. He had once flagged a general's false citation and somehow survived it. I found him in an annex of the archives, tucked behind a peeling door with no label. The hallway smelled of boiled coffee and dust, half the lights flickering above. I knocked twice and called his name. A voice answered, skeptical and rough. "Depends who's asking. Dakota Farmer, I am looking into a 2004 deletion order. You were listed on the chain of custody." There was a pause long enough to stretch into doubt. Then the door creaked open. The man who stood there was thinner than I expected, his skin creased like paper left too long in the sun. His posture leaned forward, as if gravity had been pulling him down for years. His eyes, however, were sharp. "I remember that name," he said immediately, "but I remember the signature more." He let me in. The room was filled with steel cabinets, shelves lined with printed logs and microfiche reels that had survived 2 waves of digitization. He guided me to a filing cabinet and tapped the top drawer. Nothing digital about this part. Back then, if you wanted someone gone, you needed 2 things: a signature and silence. He rummaged through laminated logs, muttering under his breath until he pulled one free and laid it flat. My eyes locked instantly on the notation. Same operational code as my deleted file. His finger landed on a line. "That day," he said, "I flagged the request. Didn't make sense. Young cadet, no psychological flags, no history of instability, but the author overrode chain protocol." "David Farmer," I finished for him. The old man's gaze flicked to me, then back to the paper. "I did not realize the name meant anything to you." "It does," I said quietly. "He was my father." For a moment the air grew heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Fulton did not blink. "They draft some kids too early," he muttered, "and some they draft wrong." He offered me a cup of weak coffee. I declined. I did not need comfort. I needed proof. That was the first breadcrumb, the first crack in the wall of silence, but it was enough. I knew now that erasure was not an accident. It was deliberate, it was signed, and it had a face. When I left Fulton's archive room, the city air felt different. It smelled of wet pavement and old metal, but beneath it was the faint taste of resolve. Proof had weight. It was no longer only memory pressing against me. It was paper, signatures, protocols bent by one man's hand. My father's hand. I returned to my small apartment, barely more than 4 walls and a desk cluttered with notes. The light from the monitor painted the room in pale blue shadows. I spread out the copies Fulton had allowed me to take. His handwriting circled one line, his initials scrawled in the margin like a witness refusing to vanish. I ran my fingers along the ink. It grounded me, reminded me that what I had seen in the booth was not a glitch. It was a crime. I opened my secure channel, the one that bypassed official networks, and sent a ping to the only person I trusted to read between the lines. Vega. Her response came almost instantly. "What are you looking for, Farmer?" I typed back, "Deletion logs 2004. Admin override. Keyword, rivers. Proxy IP traces if you can manage them." She sent another message. "Why me?" I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before replying. "Because systems obey what people refuse to admit." There was silence for the rest of the night, only the hum of servers and the scrape of my pen against paper as I tried to map connections that refused to form. Around dawn her reply arrived in encrypted code. I decrypted slowly, watching lines unfold across my screen. The override had originated from an internal terminal inside the Command Integrity Office. Assignment log, David R. Farmer. The letters cut through me sharper than any blade. I did not flinch. I had expected this. Still, seeing it laid bare made the air in the room heavier. He had not only left me behind, he had made sure the system carried his abandonment forward. I walked to a drawer I had avoided for years, a drawer labeled in black marker, "Personal, do not open." My hand hesitated only a moment before pulling it out. Inside were letters, years of them unopened or only half-read, envelopes with no return address. Some handwritten, some typed. I lifted the first. "Hope you are doing well. Don't come back." Another, "We don't have space for your kind of story. Please don't write again." My mother's name was typed neatly at the bottom of that one, Elaine Farmer. I let the letters spill across the table, my chest tightening with the weight of them. For years I had told myself they did not matter, that silence was survival, that ignoring them was strength. But strength built on silence cracks eventually. I closed my eyes and remembered the gas station, the rain on the glass, the clerk's sad wave. My own name trembling from my lips when the officer asked who I was. They had tried to erase me, but names have a way of clinging to paper, to memory, to truth. When I opened my eyes, the decision was already made. I would not stay hidden. Not anymore. A week later, I walked into the defense summit. The air inside the hall was too clean, filtered until it carried no scent of life. Flags hung with ceremonial precision, brass polished to a shine that caught the lights. Cameras rolled silently on tracks, their red dots blinking. I stood behind the podium, the stars on my shoulders catching the glare. My uniform was stiff, my hair pinned with careful precision, every part of me arranged to send a message. Not weakness, not anger, visibility. I had rehearsed the speech a dozen times. I did not need notes. Doctrine lived in my marrow, carved by years of silence. I began with a steady voice. Today we explore post-conflict intelligence, how trust is rebuilt when systems collapse, and what it means to carry scars no one sees. The audience shifted, polite but restless. I did not look at them. I looked at the camera. Somewhere 3 states south, in a modest house with beige carpet and a clock that ticked too loudly, my family was watching. I paused, letting the silence settle. On cue, the camera zoomed closer, framing my face, my nameplate, the glint of my rank. Brigadier General Dakota Farmer. In that living room far away, I imagined their faces. Elaine, rigid on the couch, hands clasped too tightly. David, standing with arms folded, his jaw set. Harper, blinking as if she had just seen a ghost speak on national television. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Silence carries its own echo. War is not always declared, I said evenly. Sometimes it begins in the quiet spaces between judgment and exile, between expectation and abandonment. The audience hushed, the weight of the words pulling them closer. I let them sit in it, let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. For 20 years they had tried to erase me. That day I was visible. It started with a file that should have been routine. A standard doctrine document, one of hundreds circulating through the system. The kind of thing most people read without really reading. But when I opened it, the words stopped feeling like text. They felt like echoes. The cadence was mine. The phrasing, the pivots, the little shortcuts I used when decisions needed speed. Every line carried my fingerprints. Yet the author field declared someone else. Lieutenant Colonel Harper Farmer, my sister. At first I told myself there could be an error. Systems misfile things all the time. A transfer gone wrong, a credit line mismatched. But when I expanded the metadata, I saw her certificate. Not just a pasted image. A live, secure signature. Approval authority, rooted clean as if it had always belonged there. I sat back in the chair and let the words swim on the screen. I wanted to believe Harper had stumbled into this, that someone had used her clearance without her knowing. But the early drafts showed something different. They carried a phrase I had invented during a freezing deployment years ago, a phrase I had never taught to anyone. Seeing it typed in her file was like looking into a mirror and seeing a stranger wearing my face. Vega was on the sofa with her tablet, scanning logs. She noticed my silence and followed my gaze. "It's too clean," she said. "Drafts this polished usually mean they scrubbed the trail." "Pull the first version," I told her. She did. And there it was, my rhythm, my shorthand, my logic. But the signature on the review line was Harper's. She had not just been handed the file. She had touched it, approved it, passed it forward with her name shining in the corner. A chill crept through me. Anger would have been easier. Anger is fire, this was ice. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you realize betrayal is not abstract. It has a name, a face, a voice you once trusted. I closed the document and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with ordinary life, cars stopping at lights, strangers walking with their collars turned up against the wind. No one out there knew a shadow was growing across my name. When I turned back, Vega was writing on a legal pad, drawing 2 columns. On one side, Dakota. On the other, Harper. Under my column, she listed phrases and models. Under hers, she listed dates of approvals. Then she circled 3 overlaps. "This isn't random," she said. I nodded, my throat tight. I picked up a photograph from an old box on the shelf. It was of Harper and me as children, sitting on porch steps. I held a book open, and she leaned close, eyes fixed on the page. That was the sister I remembered, the girl who wanted to learn everything I knew. The photo shook slightly in my hand. I placed it back in the box and closed the lid. Whatever Harper had become, she was no longer just my sister. She was standing in the space where I had been erased. That night I could not sleep. I kept seeing the phrase typed under her name. Use in spring cycle. Emphasize decision ladder. Words born in the mud of a forgotten deployment, now marching into classrooms with someone else's credit. I whispered to the dark. "If you took my voice, then I will take it back." The silence gave no answer, but I felt it listening. The longer I studied those documents, the clearer the shape became. It was not one accident. It was not a single misfiled draft. It was a pattern, precise and deliberate. My language walked through the corridors of strategy in someone else's uniform, and that uniform carried my sister's name. I spent 3 days tracing approvals through the doctrine library. The air down there always felt recycled, like breathing inside a machine. Files whispered their stories if you knew where to listen. Every pull, every transfer, every approval left a trace, and every path I followed bent toward Harper. At night, I dreamed of the gas station again, but this time when the tail lights vanished into the rain, another set of lights appeared in front of me. A lecture hall. A screen. My words spilling out in Harper's voice while cadets scribbled notes, never knowing they were listening to a ghost. I woke each morning with my throat dry and the image still burning behind my eyes. Vega stayed close. She was relentless with her tablet, pulling fragments from systems that did not like to be touched. She spoke in her usual clipped way, but sometimes her eyes softened when she looked at me. Once she said quietly, "Proof hurts more when it wears the face you still want to love." I did not answer. Some truths do not need words. The turning point came with an email header Vega decrypted. It was short, efficient, and ugly in its clarity. Use her decision later, do not attribute. Final credit will be handled. The note was rooted to Harper's account. I read it twice, then 3 times, the word her cut sharper than anything else. I felt the old rain on my skin, the gravel under my sneakers, the $20 bill in my hand, my father's voice telling me to step outside. Now the echo returned through my sister's address. Use her, do not name her, handle the credit. It was not yet enough for a tribunal, but it was enough to demand answers in a room where Harper would have no curtain to hide behind. I went to see one of her lectures. I sat in the back row while she moved across the stage with the confidence of someone who had learned the art of belonging. She spoke of doctrine as if it had always been hers, her hands drawing invisible maps in the air. The cadets leaned forward, their pens scratching as she explained the decision ladder, the radius discipline, the models I had written in mud and blood and sleepless nights. When one cadet asked about adjustments under fire, Harper smiled. She spoke my answer word for word, her tone calm, authoritative. The room believed her. They had no reason not to. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt an ache that spread through me like cold water. Watching her speak, I realized this was not just theft. It was a transformation. My silence had not simply allowed my ideas to live. It had allowed them to live as hers. When the lecture ended, applause filled the hall. Harper stepped down to greet the cadets, smiling with the ease of someone who had never been erased. I stayed where I was, watching, memorizing the way the room lit for her. I walked out before she could see me. The cool air outside hit like a slap, but it cleared my head. I knew then what Part 3 had been building toward all along. The breadcrumb trail was no longer a trail. It was a map that led directly to her. Harper was not an innocent passenger carried by the tide. She was steering. I called Vega as I walked back through the city streets. "It is time," I said simply. She did not ask what I meant. She only replied, "Then let us choose the room carefully." And for the first time in years, I felt something shift. The silence that had defined me was no longer my prison. It was my weapon. When you spend long enough in silence, stepping into a room full of voices feels like stepping onto a stage you did not ask for. The lights are hotter, the walls closer, the air thicker. The Defense Summit was exactly that. A stage dressed as a conference, polished floors, flags in neat rows, cameras sliding on quiet tracks like hunters waiting for a signal. I stood at the edge of the podium before they announced me, my palms flat against the polished wood. My nameplate gleamed under the light, Brigadier General Dakota Farmer. For years that title had been denied me. Seeing it there now felt unreal, like a word written in a language I had almost forgotten. The announcer's voice rolled across the hall, measured and ceremonial. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, General Dakota Farmer." Applause rose, polite at first, then stronger. I walked forward. My boots struck the stage in an even rhythm, steady, deliberate. I kept my eyes forward, not on the crowd, not on the flashes from cameras, but on the lens directly in front of me. Somewhere in a house I had not seen in decades, my family was watching. I began with doctrine because doctrine was safe. Today we discuss post-conflict intelligence, how trust is rebuilt when systems collapse, how scars shape the decisions that come after silence. My voice carried easily, but underneath it my chest was tight. I knew they expected a lecture. I gave them something else. War is not always declared with fanfare, I said. Sometimes it begins quietly in the spaces between judgment and exile, between belonging and abandonment. The room hushed. I could feel the weight of their attention sharpen. I paused long enough for the silence to echo, then continued. I stand here not as a symbol of perfection, but as someone who knows what it means to be erased. Systems can delete names, families can too, yet here I am. And I ask you to consider not only what we fight with weapons, but what we fight with memory. The words felt like stepping stones across a river I had drowned in once. Each sentence carried me further from the child left in the rain and closer to the officer standing in the light. From the corner of my eye, I caught a camera shifting, zooming closer. I imagined the shot traveling across satellites, landing in a living room where my mother sat stiff on the couch, where my father folded his arms, where Harper's eyes widened at the sight of me. I pictured them frozen, watching the ghost they had tried to bury speak to the world in a uniform they could not deny. I let the pause linger before I moved on. The rest of the talk was structured, the kind of lecture that fills notebooks and satisfies superiors, but woven through it were threads of something else. Every reference to scars, every mention of silence, every reminder that memory outlives deletion was aimed not at the cadets in the room but at the house 3 states away. When it ended, the applause came again. Louder, I let it roll over me but did not smile. Victory was not applause. Victory was presence. As I stepped off the stage, an aide rushed up with a folder. His eyes were nervous, his voice low. "Ma'am, there's been a request from command for an immediate briefing." I nodded, taking the folder. My hands were steady. Inside were notes about current operations, but what caught my eye was the distribution list. Harper's name appeared beside mine. For the first time in 20 years, we were listed together, as if the system itself did not realize the irony. I closed the folder and handed it back. "Schedule it," I said. The aide hurried off. I stood for a moment in the shadow of the stage, feeling the weight of everything that had shifted. My name was no longer hidden in locked files. It was printed on programs, announced on microphones, spoken in rooms where silence had once been my only companion. But the return was not just about me. It was about facing the people who had turned me into a ghost, and I knew the moment was coming when I would no longer speak to them through cameras. I would sit across a table and ask the questions out loud. That thought should have made me tremble. Instead, it steadied me. Because you can only live in shadows for so long before you decide to step into the light, no matter who it blinds. The conference ended, but the echo of it followed me long after the last handshake. My face was on screens, my words replayed in sound bites clipped and shared across networks. Reporters called it bold, unusual, even unsettling. For me, it was none of those things. It was survival written out loud. I stayed in the city that night, in a quiet hotel room with white walls that smelled faintly of detergent. I should have rested, but my body refused. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lens blinking red and imagined the look on Harper's face as she realized the silence she had lived with was no longer keeping me away. By morning, the first messages had arrived. Invitations, requests for interviews, congratulations from colleagues who had believed the official record and thought I had retired years ago. Among the clutter of praise and curiosity, one message stood out. It came in a sealed envelope slid under my door, not through digital channels, no return address, my name written in a careful hand I knew too well. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dinner, tomorrow, 8 p.m. the house." No signature. None was needed. I held the paper until my hands grew numb. My family had spent 2 decades pretending I did not exist. Now, after watching me speak on a stage they could not control, they wanted me at their table. I called Vega. Her voice was sharp with warning the moment she heard the word dinner. "They will not invite you to break bread. They will invite you to bury fire." "I know," I said, "but I cannot refuse." "You can." "No," I said quietly. "If I want the truth, I have to walk into the place where the lies began." She swore softly in another language, then exhaled. "Fine, but you do not walk in alone. I will be outside, eyes open." That night I prepared not with weapons or armor but with memory. I opened the box again, the one filled with photographs and fragments of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. I studied the faces until they blurred. My mother's neat hair, my father's stiff jaw, Harper's smile before she learned how to make it sharp. I whispered to each picture like a prayer. "Tomorrow I will not be your ghost. Tomorrow you will look at me and know I am still here." The following day I drove through the suburbs, each street a mirror of the last. Perfect lawns, careful fences, the illusion of peace. When I turned onto the street where the house stood, my chest tightened. The gate was taller than I remembered, the driveway longer, the paint fresher. But beneath it, all I could still see the bones of the place I had once called home. I parked at the curb and sat in silence. My reflection stared back from the windshield, older, sharper, lined by choices they had forced me to make. I thought of the girl at the gas station, soaked through, waiting for headlights that never came. I thought of the officer writing my name down gently as if she was afraid it might vanish. I thought of the signature in the file that declared me unfit, the handwriting of the man waiting for me inside. I stepped out and walked to the door. My boots made no sound on the stone path. When I reached the porch, the door opened before I could knock. Harper stood there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes darted across my uniform, pausing at the stars on my shoulders. She looked older, yes, but not diminished. She carried herself like someone who had learned to inhabit power comfortably. "Dakota," she said at last. My name sounded strange in her voice, like a word she had not expected to say out loud. "Harper," I answered. She stepped aside. The air inside smelled of polish and cooked meat. The house was warm, but the warmth did not touch me. Our mother was already seated at the table, her hands folded, her expression careful. My father stood near the head of the table, a glass of water in his hand. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, unreadable. Then he gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said. The word dropped heavy in the room. I sat. My hands rested lightly on the table, fingers steady, breath even. The chairs creaked, the silverware gleamed, the candles burned with soft precision. For anyone looking in from outside, it might have appeared like a family gathered in peace. But I knew better. This was not reunion, this was theater. No one spoke at first. Only the sound of cutlery against porcelain broke the silence. I let them sit with it. I had learned long ago that silence, when wielded, can be louder than shouting. Finally, Harper cleared her throat. "You made quite the impression yesterday." "It was not about impression," I said. "It was about truth." Our father's hand tightened around his glass. Our mother's lips pressed together. Harper's eyes flicked toward them, then back to me. "You could have spoken about anything," she said. "You chose scars, silence, erasure. Why?" "Because they are real," I said evenly, "and because no one else will name them." The table fell quiet again. But under that silence, I felt something begin to stir. The questions I had carried for 20 years were no longer content to live in shadows. Soon, here at this table, they would demand answers. And I was ready to hear them, no matter how sharp they cut. Dinner began like a performance. Plates passed in silence, silverware aligned with military precision, wine poured without spilling a drop. If I had not known better, I might have thought it was a ritual of reconciliation. But I knew my family too well. This was not reconciliation. It was control disguised as civility. I watched them carefully as I cut into the roasted meat placed in front of me. My mother kept her eyes on her plate, moving food around more than eating it. My father's jaw tightened with every chew, as if each bite was a chore. Harper, across from me, was the only one who looked comfortable. She leaned back slightly, her glass tilted in her hand, her expression calm. It struck me how easily she had grown into the role of someone at ease in this house, as if she had never witnessed the night they left me behind. "You look well," my mother said finally, her voice brittle. "I am well," I replied. The words hung there, simple and unbending. My father cleared his throat. "Your appearance yesterday was unexpected." "Unexpected for you, perhaps," I said, "but not for me." His eyes narrowed. "You chose your words with care, some might say with malice." I set down my fork, folding my hands on the table. I chose words with truth. If truth cuts, then perhaps it was not me holding the blade. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Harper's gaze shifted between us, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Then she spoke. "You always did like drama, Dakota. You could have given a technical talk. Instead, you gave a confession." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Confession implies guilt. I am not the guilty one here." Her smile faded. For a brief second, something flashed in her eyes, something sharp, defensive, almost fearful. She recovered quickly, but I had seen it. I leaned forward slightly. "I spent the last month following documents. Doctrine files, approval logs, lecture notes, each one with a signature attached. Yours." Harper's fingers tightened around her glass. "That does not prove anything." "It proves enough," I said. "Phrases I wrote in field journals appeared in those files. Strategies I tested under fire carried your name into classrooms. Tell me, Harper, how does a phrase born in a frozen border post end up in your doctrine review years later?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then glanced at our father. His expression remained unchanged, carved from stone. Our mother's hand trembled slightly against her fork, but she said nothing. I pressed on. "Do not tell me it was coincidence. Do not tell me it was delegation. You signed those approvals. You forwarded those files. You sent notes to curriculum boards, notes that said use her decision ladder, do not attribute, final credit will be handled." The words hit the table like a hammer. For the first time, Harper looked unsettled. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly. "It does not matter where," I said. "What matters is why." Her voice rose, sharper now. "You think you were the only one who suffered. Do you know what it was like to live under their roof after you were gone?" Every dinner was a test, every glance a measurement. They needed a daughter who would not fail them. I did what I had to do. The admission hung in the air, raw and jagged. My mother's fork clattered to the plate. My father's face did not move. I stared at Harper, my pulse loud in my ears. "You did not just survive, you thrived on my absence. You built your career on the shadow they left behind." Her eyes glistened, but her jaw remained set. "And you let me," she whispered. "You vanished, Dakota. You disappeared into silence. What did you expect me to do? Refuse the hand that fed me?" I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw the table over and demand justice with fury. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. My voice came out low and steady. "I expected my sister not to become my executioner." The words landed heavier than I intended. Harper flinched. My mother whispered my name, but it broke in her throat. My father finally spoke, his tone like iron. "This dinner was meant to restore order. Instead, you bring chaos. If you cannot sit in peace, you should not have come." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man whose signature had erased me, whose voice had told me to step out into the rain. His eyes were still cold, but for the first time I thought I saw something behind them. Not regret, calculation. I rose from my chair slowly. The room seemed to shrink. "Order built on silence is not peace. It is a cage. I will not live in it again." I walked to the door. No one followed. My boots struck the wooden floor in a rhythm that felt final. At the threshold, I turned once more. "Harper, this is not over. The truth does not stay buried forever, not even in this house." Then I stepped into the night air, letting the door close behind me with a thud that carried all the weight of 2 decades. Outside, the cool wind filled my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt it cut clean instead of cold. The night outside their door was still, but inside me there was no stillness. My chest burned with everything unsaid, everything that had been buried for too long. I could have walked away then, left them behind the heavy door they had built between us. But silence had kept me erased for half my life. I would not let it end this way. I turned back and pushed the door open again. The sound startled them. My mother's hand flew to her chest, Harper stiffened in her chair, and my father's jaw set harder than stone. "No," I said firmly, stepping back into the dining room. "We finish this tonight." The candlelight flickered against their faces. The table, so carefully set, now looked like a battlefield. Plates of untouched food sat heavy between us, knives and forks glinting under the light. I looked directly at Harper. "You admit you signed, you admit you forwarded, you admit you carried my words into rooms I was not allowed in. Tell me why you did it, not excuses, truth." Her lips parted, but she glanced at our father before speaking. "Because it was survival, because if I did not, I would be next. Do you think they would have spared me if I refused to carry the weight? They needed someone obedient. I was obedient." "You call that obedience," I said, my voice sharp, "but it was betrayal." Harper's eyes flared. "You left me alone in that house. Do you know what it was like to sit at that table every night with them pretending you never existed? I was 13 too, Dakota. I learned quickly. Either I became what they demanded or I would vanish just like you." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I saw not the officer with her neat hair and polished tone, but the girl who used to lean against me on the porch, desperate to belong. For a second, I almost softened. Then I remembered the note Vega had decrypted. "Use her decision latter, do not attribute. Final credit will be handled." Those were not the words of a frightened child. They were the words of someone who had learned to wield absence as a weapon. "You chose your side," I said coldly. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Please, not tonight, we wanted peace." I turned to her slowly. "Peace built on lies is just another kind of war. You wanted me erased because I did not fit your order. Tell me, Mother, when you wrote me those letters telling me not to come back, was that peace too?" Her face paled. Her hands twisted in her lap. She said nothing. My father set his glass down with deliberate care. His eyes locked on mine, steady, unreadable. "This is not the place for accusations," he said. "This is exactly the place," I shot back. "This house is where the erasure began, where the silence started. And now we are going to break it." For the first time, Harper's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. "You cannot take everything from me now. I built my career, my reputation, my life on those doctrines. I carried the family name when you vanished. Do you really think you can walk back in and rip it all away?" "I do not need to take anything," I said quietly. "The truth does that on its own." She froze at the words. My father leaned back, his face shadowed. His silence was louder than anything Harper could have said. It was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of calculation. I pushed my chair back and stood. This is the last time we speak in shadows. The next conversation will be in the open, with every record laid bare. And when it happens, Harper, you will have to answer for every signature you wrote. My mother reached toward me, her fingers trembling. Dakota, please, you do not understand what she stopped. Her eyes flicked to my father. His expression did not change, but the warning in it was enough to clamp her words shut. I felt my pulse surge. There was more here, hidden just beneath the surface, something even Harper's betrayal could not explain. My father's silence was too controlled, too practiced. I turned to leave again, but this time my father spoke, his voice low and measured. Be careful, Dakota. Some truths are heavier than even you can carry. I looked back at him. You tried to erase me. Do you really think I fear the weight of truth now? His lips curved almost into a smile. It was not warmth. It was a challenge. I walked out without waiting for another word. The night air hit me again, cool and sharp, but this time it carried a strange clarity. Harper's betrayal was real, yes, but beneath it, deeper and more dangerous, was my father's hand, the architect of silence. The first twist had revealed itself. The second, I knew, was waiting. I did not sleep the night after the dinner. I lay on the bed in my hotel room staring at the ceiling, listening to the city hum through the window, my father's final words replaying in my head. Some truths are heavier than even you can carry. It was not the voice of warning. It was the voice of someone guarding something big enough that even betrayal from my sister was only the surface. By dawn, I was already at Vega's apartment. She looked at me, dark circles under her eyes, and handed me a mug of bitter coffee before I said anything. You look like hell, she muttered. I feel like hell, I replied, sipping. But we do not have time for sleep. We need proof, more than we have now, something that cuts deeper than Harper's signatures. Her brow lifted. You think the father is hiding a card? I nodded. It was in his eyes. He knew something I was not supposed to know, something heavier than doctrine theft, something that makes Harper's part look like a shield. Vega did not argue. She opened her laptop and the glow of code spilled across the room. Then we go digging where it hurts. We started with the doctrine servers again, combing through archived reviews. Vega traced Harper's logins, overlaying them with administrative backdoors. The pattern was clear. Harper's approvals always coincided with another account shadowing the process. The second account had higher clearance, flagged only with a generic identifier. Admin RF. RF, Vega murmured. Initials? I froze. David R. Farmer, my father. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. He had not erased me only as a father. He had erased me as a commander. We pulled deeper. Vega's fingers flew, coaxing the system to reveal what it wanted to hide. Dozens of deleted memos, stripped headers, and overwritten drafts emerged like bones from soil. At the center of them was a directive stamped with clearance far above Harper's reach. The words were simple, sterile, but devastating. Subject: Operational Authorship Protocol Directive, Credit Transfer Authorized. Assign authorship under secondary designation. Original source will not be recorded. Rationale: Stability of family unit, perception of continuity, protection of legacy. The signature at the bottom was clean and unmistakable. David R. Farmer. I sat back, my breath caught in my throat. He had not simply abandoned me. He had written me out of history with deliberate precision, disguising it as protection of family and legacy. Harper was not the architect. She was the instrument. Vega looked at me carefully. You wanted the truth, now you have it. What do you want to do with it? My first instinct was rage, to storm into his office, slam the directive on his desk, and demand he look me in the eye while I tore his illusion apart. But rage is a trap. Rage blinds, and he had spent his life calculating. I would not give him that advantage. We need this unshakable, I said slowly. If I confront him with only fragments, he will deny, discredit, twist the narrative until it becomes mud. I need a wall of proof so high it cannot be climbed. Vega nodded. Then we dig further. Financial logs, calendar records, message trails, everything. For hours we worked in silence broken only by the hum of servers. Each new file added another stone to the wall. Cross-reference times, directives carrying his digital fingerprint, exchanges between Harper and unnamed accounts that matched his schedules. The picture sharpened. My father had orchestrated a program of authorship laundering, feeding Harper my work and shielding her rise under the guise of continuity. But one question haunted me more than the theft itself. Why? Why would he go to such lengths not only to erase me, but to assign my life's work to the daughter who remained in his house? The answer arrived unexpectedly, tucked inside an old classified memo that Vega unearthed near midnight. Its header read, family stability doctrine. The text was short, but my hands shook as I read it. Maintain a model of reliability. One daughter as anchor, one removed as variable. Protect the name through stability. Any anomaly must be excised for the greater image of order. It was not about me. It was about the family brand. To him, I had been the anomaly. Harper had been the anchor. I closed my eyes, my chest heaving. For 20 years I had carried the wound of personal abandonment, the ache of being left behind at a gas station. But the truth was colder. I had not been abandoned for who I was. I had been erased for what I represented. A threat to the image, a variable in his equation. When I opened my eyes, Vega was watching me. "This is the twist, Dakota," she said softly. "It was never only Harper. It was always him." Her words settled into me like iron. I stood, pacing the room, my hands trembling with both fury and clarity. Then we take this public, not in whispers, not in rooms where silence can be controlled. We put it into the record where even he cannot tear it out. Vega tilted her head. "That will not just end his career, it will end hers too. Are you ready for that?" I paused, staring at the folder of files glowing on the screen. Harper's face flashed in my mind, the desperate anger in her voice at the dinner table, the way she had said she had only survived by obedience. I thought of the photo of us on the porch, 2 children with a book between us. Then I thought of her signature across my words. "I am ready," I said. "But this time, Harper will hear the truth in front of everyone, and he will too." Vega closed the laptop with a click that sounded like a lock snapping shut. Then we prepare for war. The tribunal room smelled of polished wood and cold air. Rows of officers sat in stiff uniforms, their faces carved into stone, their eyes sharp with curiosity or judgment. At the center stood the long table where evidence was to be laid out. I had been in rooms like this before, but always as a voice behind doctrine or analysis, never as the subject of the storm. Vega slid the files into place in front of me, each one encrypted, copied, and sealed with audit tags so no one could claim tampering. She leaned close and whispered, "Once we start, there is no walking this back." "I do not want to walk it back," I said. My voice surprised even me with its calmness. The chair of the tribunal, a woman with hair the color of steel and eyes to match, nodded for us to begin. "General Farmer, you requested this session with extraordinary urgency. State your case." I rose, the room shifted slightly, bodies leaning forward. I did not waste words. For 20 years my work has been erased, not forgot, not misfiled, erased. I clicked the projector and the first document appeared on the screen. My doctrine draft, the phrase I had coined in a freezing border post, circled in red. Beneath it, the approval stamp, Lieutenant Colonel Harper Farmer. Murmurs rippled across the rows. I pressed on. "Here are 3 more," I said, clicking through them. Each carrying the same rhythm, the same phrasing, the same logic that lived first in my field journals, each credited to someone else. Another click. The decrypted memo filled the screen. "Use her decision ladder, do not attribute. Final credit will be handled." The murmurs grew louder. The tribunal chair raised a hand and silence fell again. "Who wrote this note?" I did not answer with words. I clicked again. The metadata appeared. The routing trail. The final signature, David R. Farmer. The silence that followed was deeper than any I had ever known. My father sat in the audience, flanked by 2 senior officers. His posture remained perfect, but I saw the twitch of his jaw, the slow tightening of his hand on the armrest. I continued. "For years the narrative has been that I disappeared, that I was the anomaly. That silence was my choice, but here is the directive that proves otherwise." The final slide filled the screen. Family stability doctrine. Maintain a model of reliability. One daughter as anchor, one removed as variable. Protect the name through stability. Any anomaly must be excised for the greater image of order. Gasps broke through the room. The words were undeniable. I turned to face him directly, even though protocol said I should address only the chair. "You did not abandon me because I failed you. You erased me because I disrupted the picture you wanted to show the world. You called me an anomaly, not a daughter. You fed my work to Harper to protect your illusion of stability." His eyes locked on mine. Cold, unflinching. Then he stood. The officers around him shifted, but he raised a hand and they sat back down. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of authority. "You think you understand, Dakota. You think truth is simple. But the truth is this. Empires are built on images, not individuals. One child had to hold the line. One had to vanish. It was never personal. It was necessary." The words sent a chill across the room. He was not denying it, he was justifying it. "Necessary," I repeated, my voice low but steady. You left me on the side of a road, you wrote me out of records, you made my sister carry a life that was not hers, and you call that necessary?" His face did not change. "The family name survived, the doctrines survived, the institution survived, that is what matters." I stepped closer to the table, my hands braced on the wood. "No, what matters is truth. And today the truth is no longer yours to bury." The chair cleared her throat. "General Farmer Sr., do you admit these directives carry your authorization?" For the first time, my father hesitated. A flicker of calculation crossed his eyes, then he nodded once. "Yes, they are mine." The room erupted. Voices rose, officers turned to one another in disbelief, some shaking their heads, others whispering fiercely. The chair banged her gavel until silence returned. "Then the record is clear," she said coldly. The authorship program was not the work of Lieutenant Colonel Harper Farmer alone. It was designed and executed by her superior, her father. I looked at Harper. She sat pale and rigid in the second row, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. She had thought she was surviving. She had not realized she was a pawn in a larger design. I turned back to the tribunal. "This is my proof. This is my war. For 2 decades I lived in silence. Today the silence ends." The chair's voice was firm. "So recorded." The gavel struck again, and in that echo I felt the cage of 20 years shatter. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the room erupted again. Officers whispered, some furious, some stunned, some simply unwilling to look directly at the man who had once commanded them. My father stood unbowed, his chin high, his silence a wall he had lived behind his whole life. He had admitted enough, but the arrogance in his face told me he still believed he had done nothing wrong. Harper was another story. She looked like a thread pulled loose from a uniform, fraying in the open. Her hands trembled where they rested on her knees, her lips pressed tight as if holding back a scream. When the tribunal chair dismissed the session, Harper did not stand right away. She sat frozen while the rest of the room stirred. I waited by the doors. I knew she would come to me. When she finally approached, her eyes were wild, not with rage but with confusion. She stopped a foot away, searching my face as if I might explain the hole that had just opened beneath her. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew it was him. All this time I thought that it was you alone," I said quietly, her voice cracked. "I thought I betrayed you to survive. I thought I carried the burden because I was weak, but he made me into a weapon against you." There were tears in her eyes now, but she blinked them back. She did not want me to see her broken. I nodded slowly. "Yes, he designed it, but you signed your name, you carried it. You cannot hide behind him completely." She flinched at that, but she did not argue. Her shoulders sagged. "So what happens now? My career is finished, his legacy destroyed, and you get to stand tall." I shook my head. "No, I do not stand tall, I stand visible. There is a difference. I lost 20 years to silence, Harper. Nothing can return that to me. Not even this." For a moment she looked like the girl from the porch again, the one who leaned into me to see the pages of a book. Then she turned away, her back straightening as if she were already building walls to protect herself. Vega joined me at the doorway, her eyes following Harper. "She will either break or rebuild," she murmured. "But either way, she is free of his grip now. That might be the cruelest mercy of all." We left the tribunal hall together. The air outside was sharp with winter. For the first time in decades, I felt the cold without bitterness. But peace did not arrive easily. The days that followed were a storm of reports, articles, interviews, official reviews. My father was suspended pending investigation. The words sounded clinical, but the meaning was clear. His reign was over. He walked out of the building that had once bowed to him and never returned. Harper resigned quietly. No statement, no farewell. Just silence, the same silence that had once been my prison. And me, I was asked to fill the void. To take the chair at panels, to lead doctrine reviews, to become the visible proof that erasure could not last forever. At first I accepted because it felt like justice. But late at night, alone in my quarters, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if justice was only another cage. My life had been defined by absence, then by exposure. Who was I without either? One evening, I returned to the old box. A photo of us as children still rested on top, the ink of my mother's handwriting fading at the edges. Summer reading. I held it in my hands and felt the ache of what could never be restored. I realized then that victory was not about destroying him, or exposing her, or reclaiming my name. Victory was learning to live outside the silence without letting it consume me. I placed the photo back in the box gently. This time, I did not close the lid. The reckoning was not just theirs, it was mine. The days that followed the tribunal were heavy with bureaucracy. Reports, forms, debriefings, statements, each piece of paper a small confirmation that the past 20 years had been real, that the silence had ended, that the erasure could not continue. but paperwork does not heal memory, and it does not mend what was broken by intention. Harper avoided me at first. Our eyes crossed in the hallways at mess during lectures, but we said nothing. Her shoulders were tense, her gait measured. I could see the way she wrestled with shame and the remnants of pride. I waited, I gave her space. Silence, after all, had been my companion for so long. I knew the weight of waiting. Finally, one evening she came to my office. The light was soft, warm, a stark contrast to the fluorescent harshness of the tribunal room. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped, eyes uncertain. She began, then stopped. She swallowed. I don't know how to apologize, or if apology is enough. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. She did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room was still, the air heavy with the unspoken. Then she whispered, I thought survival meant doing what had to be done. I did not know how to be a sister and a soldier at the same time. I thought I could manage both. You managed one, I said quietly, but at the cost of the other. I survived, Harper, but surviving is not the same as living. Her hands trembled slightly. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to exist where you could not. I never realized how much you carried alone. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The image of the girl who once leaned on my shoulder as we read together flashed in my mind. The officer, polished and confident, had replaced her. But beneath the armor, she was still that girl, caught between fear and obedience, trying to survive a system that had never been kind. You will carry the lessons of this, I said slowly. And so will I, but we both need to decide what comes next. Not as daughter and sister under a man's rules, but as ourselves, free or as free as we can be. Her eyes filled, and she nodded once. Not fully healed, not fully absolved, but willing to take the first step toward understanding. I rose and walked to the window, the city spread out below like a map of possibilities. For the first time in decades, I felt a weight lift, the silence replaced with something else, choice, autonomy. The ability to move forward without looking over my shoulder for the shadows of those who had tried to erase me. Behind me, Harper's chair scraped softly. Where do we begin? She asked. I smiled faintly. We begin with truth. We begin with acknowledging the past. And then we build from here, together if we can. The wind outside rustled the trees, brushing against the glass. I could hear the faint hum of life continuing, indifferent to the battles we had fought in quiet rooms and tribunal halls. I turned from the window and looked at Harper again. What about him? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Our father, I held her gaze. He will face what he must. Justice is not always swift and it is not always personal, but the truth has a way of reaching those who think they can bury it. We did not speak more of it. The room was heavy with absence and presence, with words said and unsaid. For the first time, I realized that victory was not in the tribunal, or the files, or even in reclaiming my work. Victory was in standing in the world and being seen as myself, not as erased, not as a shadow, not as a variable in someone else's calculation. That evening, I returned to the box of photographs and letters. I opened it carefully. The photo of us reading together as children was on top, worn at the edges. I traced the faces with my finger, the ink faded but still legible. I left the lid off this time. It was no longer a vault of memory to hide from. It was a reminder of resilience, of survival, of the life I had carried silently for 2 decades and the life I would now carry openly. I placed the photo on my desk, next to my uniform and files, and for the first time, I felt a measure of peace. Not complete peace, perhaps, but enough to know that I had survived the erasure. Enough to know that the silence that had defined me no longer controlled me. I sat back in my chair, letting the hum of the city settle into my bones. My name was mine again. Dakota Farmer, visible, present, free, and for the first time in 20 years, I smiled.